Hi everyone, so we'll go through the lecture on the legal classification of medicines, considering sort of POM, P and GSL, so that's prescription only medicines, pharmacy medicines and general sales list. So in terms of this lecture, we're going to aim to sort of provide an overview of the legal classification of medicines. We'll make some considerations about the term medicinal product, and we will discuss the different legal classifications of medicines and any restrictions on their sale and supply, and then we'll go on to think about how we determine the legal classification of a product as well. So in terms of medicine, is it a medicine? So the regulations don't actually use the term medicine, but they instead use the term medicinal product. And so whenever you're looking up any sort of definitions, you'll probably see things referred to as medicinal product. Now, a medicinal product is any substance or a combination of substances that have properties of preventing or treating disease in human beings. Any substance or a combination of substances that may be used to may be used by or administered to human beings, and essentially what they do is they have some sort of effect. So they might be able to restore, correct, or modify a sort of physiological function. And normally that's done by either having some form of pharmacological action, an immunological action, or a metabolic action. Additional to that, it's about sort of making a medical diagnosis as well. So for example, something like your classic medication, i.e. tablets, that has some sort of pharmacological or a metabolic action, and therefore can be classed as a medicinal product, which we all appreciate. But equally, if you have a consideration towards things like diabetic testing strips, they can be used to make a medical diagnosis, and so essentially they are also classified as a medicinal product. Okay, so it's not just about things that the patient takes as sort of our defined term as medicinal product, but it's also about utilizing and thinking about things that can make a medical diagnosis as well. So the MHRA is the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, and essentially what they do is they operate a system of licensing medicines. Now, medicines which meet the standards for safety, quality, and efficacy are essentially granted a what's called marketing authorization. Now, this was previously called a product license, but it's now referred to as a marketing authorization, which basically allows that product to be then prescribed or sold or used. Now, I guess the most recent sort of and up-to-date involvement with the MHRA is the COVID vaccines. So you will know that they've had to have approval by the MHRA for them to be utilized and administered to patients. I guess one thing to note and to be mindful of is that the MHRA is separate from the government, and I think this has come through from sort of the vaccines itself. So there may or might have been pressure from government to release and make available vaccines for use, but ultimately the MHRA operates separately from the government. It's not influenced in any way, and it works to its own sort of safety and quality standards to ensure that whatever they approve meets their stringent sort of standards, and they take ownership of that, so they can't be dissuaded by I guess pressures. In terms of the medicines classification, so the legal status of medicinal products is part of the marketing authorization, and then that affects how products are categorized, but also how they are available and where you can sort of obtain these medicines. So, for example, you may only be able to obtain a product on a prescription, and most of these products are referred to as prescription-only medicines, i.e., kept within the dispensary of a pharmacy, and you can only obtain them if you have a valid prescription. The next category is pharmacy medicines. So these are medicines which can be sold in a pharmacy and they don't necessarily need a prescription. However, have to be sold under the supervision of a pharmacist. So an example of this would be something like day nurse or night nurse, i.e. medicines which are sort of kept behind the pharmacy sort of medicines counter in the main shop space. They're not freely available for the public to sort of pick up and kind of walk around with, but equally they can be purchased. And I guess a pharmacist is available or around and they are supervising those sales. So they have the ability to intervene and get involved or kind of, question the sale should they wish or need to. But ultimately that patient can step away from the pharmacy with some medicines, and these tend to be slightly stronger than what they can sort of pick up by themselves off the shop floor or self-service. And I guess the final sort of status that we can think about is the general sales medicines. So these are essentially GSL, and they can be sold in sort of general retail outlets, and they don't really necessarily need a pharmacist to supervise their sales. So for example, medicines which are available in a BP petrol station or could be available through a vending machine, i.e. sometimes you find that in public toilets you might have like a vending machine and that contains small boxes of, I don't know, paracetamol or ibuprofen. Those are essentially general sale list items. They have specific or special kind of provisions associated with them, which allows them to be sold in that general space without the need and or the supervision of a pharmacist. So I guess I kind of want to take a sidestep at this point and think about whether we have to sell. So you, as a future pharmacist, do you have to sell or supply? Okay. Now this is a key question because actually sometimes, as a pharmacist or a pharmacy student, you almost feel like if a patient is there presenting in front of you, you almost are obliged to supply. Okay. Now, actually, the matter of fact is that pharmacists are empowered. You can refuse to sell and supply any medicines. So if you feel that the sale or supply is going to be sort of contrary to your sort of clinical judgment, you think it's not in the best interest of the patient, then you can refuse that sale. Obviously you will have to justify why you are refusing the sale, and you will have to provide some sort of an account as to your reasons for. So you can't just refuse a sale because you don't feel like it. However, if you thought that the sale or supply of said medicine was going to be detrimental to your patient's health, there is an impact, it could make their condition worse, that they could develop X, Y, or Z, then actually you are acting in the best interest of the patient. So you can refuse to sort of provide that supply to that patient. And that's something that you need to bear in mind. We are empowered to refuse a sale, but ultimately we need to be able to justify why we have refused that sale and be aware of the wider impact and the global impact of refusing sales or supplies to patients. So I guess I want to kind of bring a patient in here. So we've got Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones's wife asks for some Sudafed for Mr. Jones. Now you understand or identify, he suffers with hypertension. He also uses an inhaler which is called Ventolin, and he uses this inhaler to manage his asthma. So a couple of bits of information about the set case and the scenario. So, she is being adamant that he has had the Sudafed before. Obviously, he's suffering and desperately needs the Sudafed for symptomatic relief, and is getting quite irate with you that you're not making the supply. So a couple of things you need to be mindful of is that hypertension is high blood pressure. He's also using something called Ventolin, which he's using for asthma. So you've got two conditions here. You've got high blood pressure and asthma. And I guess this is the key thing. So although you might think actually it's just a product that they can buy off the shelf from a pharmacy, we need to think about the wider impact of said drugs. So Sudafed contains the ingredient pseudoephedrine. Now, pseudoephedrine actually is a potent vasoconstrictor, and so what that will do is it will further increase the blood pressure because it causes constriction of the blood vessels. So it will further raise his blood pressure. It would be quite detrimental to his health. But also because it's constricting vessels, there's a chance that it can make the asthma worse as well. So it constricts the bronchioles and therefore makes the breathing more difficult for the patient. So this is us as healthcare professionals using our clinical knowledge to understand that Sudafed is contraindicated for patients that are hypertensive or, suffer with kind of cardiac related conditions, but equally those that related to respiratory conditions. Now, I guess it doesn't matter how adamant the patient's spouse is being at this point. We have to be mindful of our duty of care to the patient. We have clinical knowledge to make this decision. And so you'd be well within your rights to refuse the sale or supply because you can justify that this patient having this medicine would be detrimental to their health. So let's think about the general sales list, okay, or GSL. So a GSL product is essentially defined as a product that is not a prescription-only medicine, so that's a POM, P-O-M, or a pharmacy medicine, which is normally categorized as a P with a square around it, okay? Now, this is a product that's covered by an authorization that this product is available on general sale. In terms of general sale list medicines, they are covered by an EU marketing authorization, basically determining that it's not a POM, and that they are and they should be available on general sale. Now, what we mean by that is that these can be reasonably sort of safely sold or supplied without the supervision of a pharmacist. So if you think back to my example, when I used the example of vending machines inside sort of public restrooms, then well, there are no pharmacists present. They might be using the bathrooms, but they're not necessarily using, they're not supervising the sale or supply. So there may be restrictions on the quantity or the pack size, which allows them to have that marketing authorization, okay? But ultimately, a general sales list medicine can be supplied safely without the need or the use of a pharmacist to supervise that sale. So they don't need to be sold. Under the supervision of a pharmacist. Now, remember, they can be sold in a registered pharmacy. Okay, so you can still sell them in a pharmacy, but they can also be sold in other retail outlets, as long as those retail outlets can close. Okay, so you need to be able to exclude the public at some point. So what I mean by that is places like supermarkets, newsagents, petrol stations, even those public restrooms where you can buy these sorts of medicines, at some point they'll be able to exclude the public, i.e. supermarkets can close, newsagents can close, petrol stations can close. Equally, something like those public restrooms can be locked such they can exclude the public. Now, within a pharmacy, this is where there's a slight sort of snag in some of the rules. So in theory, if you were selling it in a newsagent's or a petrol station, there's no pharmacist supervising. The sales and supplies can carry on. However, if you're selling within a pharmacy, they can actually only be sold when a pharmacist has taken on the role of a responsible pharmacist. So the pharmacist has to essentially be present and be able to sign on as the RP or the responsible pharmacist before the sale or supply of general sales list medicines can go ahead. Obviously, if the pharmacist was to then become absent, i.e. they were to go to the doctor's surgery for a meeting or something like that, they would still be able to continue selling GSLs during this absence, but ultimately the pharmacist has to take on the role of responsible pharmacist first before any sale or supplies can happen. Now, if you compare and contrast that with a petrol station, there was never a pharmacist present, yet they can still continue. So there's a bit of a disparity in terms of the approaches that you have for the sale and supply. So there are a couple of exemptions and then things that we need to think about. So there are a couple of reasons when a GSL can't be a GSL. So when it's for use as an anthelmintic, which is basically something for the treatment of worms, if it's for parenteral administration, so if there's a formula or a preparation that's injectable, then it can't be a GSL. Any products which are classified as eye ointments can never be a GSL, or used as an enema. If you've got something that's used for the irrigation of wounds of the bladder, the vagina, or the rectum, again, they can't be classified as a GSL. And those which can be preparations for children containing aloxaprine or aspirin, again, cannot be classified as GSL. So I'm going to use paracetamol as an example. So the rules the rules surrounding paracetamol say that it can be a GSL when the maximum strength is 500 milligrams, which we've got here, and that the maximum pack size does not exceed 16 tablets or non-effervescent 16 capsules or non-effervescent tablets. Obviously, if it was effervescent, then that's actually permitted to be about 30, but if it was non-effervescent, i.e. normal tablets or capsules, then the maximum quantity is 16. So you see this pack here, it's got 16, its maximum strength of 500 milligrams. So this could be classified as a GSL item. In terms of liquid, again, I will use paracetamol as an example. Now, bear in mind, I'm not expecting you to learn all of these. I'm just using these as a demonstration, as an example. So please don't feel like you need to go away from here and start learning all of the different pack sizes or anything. That's not the case. What I need you to do is to have an understanding about how the different sizes are determined and how that applies to its product license or marketing authorization. So the rules and the guidance suggest that you can only be GSL for liquid when, for an adult, the maximum pack size is 160. However, for children under 12, the dose can't exceed more than 5 ml. So an individual dose can't be larger than 5 ml. And to a maximum volume of 100 ml. So for example, this is 100 ml. This makes it a GSL product. So let's talk about pharmacy medicines. So this is any medicinal product which is basically not a POM, i.e. a prescription only medicine, and therefore, and also not classified as general sales list medicine. So if it's not a POM and not a GSL, it by virtue becomes a pharmacy medicine, or what's classed as a PMED. Okay, again, they are covered by a marketing authorization, and it specifies that the product is to be only available from a pharmacy. Okay, so that means that you can't purchase this or obtain this medicine from sort of any other retail outlet. It has to be from a pharmacy. Remember, medicines which are made by pharmacists, so extemps, okay, and they are classified as pharmacy medicines. So even if they contain ingredients which are P or GSL, they become pharmacy medicines. So a good example of this is olive oil eardrops. So olive oil can be used as eardrops for patients to help loosen wax. Now you can buy small bottles of olive oil on the shop, and that's a GSL, and you can purchase that. However, if a pharmacist was to then make an extemp prep of this, i.e. they get a big bottle of olive oil, I mean, you could use the olive oil that you can pick up in Sainsbury's, really. But if they got refined olive oil and they got small glass, little glass bottles with droppers, and they started to decant, small bottles worth of olive oil in each one, then by virtue, because they've made an extemp preparation, they would have to produce the appropriate sort of labels with the batch numbers, expiry dates, etc. The minute they do that, it makes the product that they've created a pharmacy medicine, which means it has to be sold in a pharmacy, must be kept behind the pharmacy counter, and can only be sold under the sale or supervision of a pharmacist. So as I've just touched upon the topic, so the retail sales and or supplies of pharmacy medicines must be made within a retail pharmacy business. So it has to be at a registered pharmacy and by or under the supervision of a registered pharmacist. So as long as the pharmacist has taken on the role of responsible pharmacist, they have signed on, they are continuing to remain signed on, then the sale and supply of PMEDs can continue. Obviously, the minute that a responsible pharmacist becomes absent, so they leave the pharmacy because they have to go to a meeting or they're going to lunch or something, or equally, if they are absent or they sign out and leave the building or the premises, then those sales and supplies have to cease. They cannot continue selling pharmacy medicines in the absence of a pharmacist. And again, if you're not aware of this, then you need to make yourselves very familiar with the responsible pharmacist guidelines, and think about the registered pharmacist role. If you're, these are some of the things that we would be discussing as part of an exam question. So making sure that you're aware of the RP guidelines and how it affects what you can and cannot sell or supply when a pharmacist is present versus when they're not present. So a couple of other things just to add. So pharmacy medicines need to be used more carefully than medicines sold in retail outlets. So they tend to be a bit more potent, a bit more sort of aggressive, and a bit more stronger. The impact of them is that they can have more sort of profound interactions with regular medications. So a great example is the example I used earlier, which was Sudafed. Obviously, that interacts with or is contraindicated in patients who are suffering with hypertension and or respiratory conditions. You've got the likes of Daynurse, Night-Nurse, Lemsips, Cocodamol, Panadol, Paramol, all medicines which contain ingredients which may or might have an interaction or a reaction with either the patient's current medication or medical conditions. And so they need to be used more carefully, and their supply needs to be overseen. Obviously, pharmacy staff need to be able to discuss with the patient how the medication is meant to be used. So, identifying if it's the most appropriate sort of medication, and making sure that if there are any concerns raised, then that patient has access to other healthcare professionals as part of their treatment. So normally things like, use this for the next 5 days, for example. If you're no better in 5 days, then you need to go and see and speak to your doctor. If you're no better after 24 hours after taking this, then you need to go and see XYZ. So it helps you to have that discussion and provide that holistic care. Obviously, the information packets generally provide advice on who to see and when to see if the condition does not improve or in fact gets worse. In terms of the packs available for patients or the public to buy in sort of retail outlets, and I'm talking about sort of places like petrol stations, etc. Medicines like ibuprofen and paracetamol can be bought as PMEDs, and they'll be available in larger pack sizes, but obviously requiring a pharmacist supervision. There may still be a limit on how many medicines or how much medicine a patient may be able to buy from a pharmacy, but it tends to be that they can buy more of it and larger pack sizes as a pharmacy medicine. And obviously the point of having these restrictions, i.e. having a pharmacist present to supervise the sales, is to prevent sort of harmful kind of long-term use and also inappropriate sort of behaviors. And so we're talking about sort of abuse of medicines, things like addiction to certain types of medicines. And I guess we as healthcare professionals are best placed to try and support our patients and discuss behaviors, but also support patients with their long-term conditions and management, and actually helping them sort of prevent any delay in the diagnosis of conditions which may or might lead to require treatment. What I mean by that is people may sometimes just offset going to seek help by just buying and self-medicating, have a pain or have an infection on their foot and just keep buying antifungal cream and hope that it may treat it, but actually they need something a bit more sort of targeted. They might need something a bit more stronger, which would be visiting the GP and getting a prescription. But actually sometimes people will just put it off, and their approach will be to just keep buying something like Canesten cream just to sort of treat and try and hope it goes away. Other examples of things that may or might be pharmacy medicines include things like the emergency contraception and medicines that contain sort of stronger ingredients, such as things like codeine, which is a opioid-based painkiller, that helps to treat pain, which may or might not be sort of relieved by the sort of use of aspirin, ibuprofen, or paracetamol. So as an example here, I'll use paracetamol again. So for the product to be licensed as a pharmacy or P medicine, okay, it has to have a maximum pack size of 32, okay, and the restrictions in terms of the supply is that the max you can supply is 100 tablets, which is a bit random because obviously multiples of 32 do not make 100, it makes 96. But ultimately, you know, it will have a small square with a P inside it, denoting that it's a pharmacy medicine somewhere on the packaging. And that will give you the indication that this product is licensed as a pharmacy medicine. And then it will be a maximum pack size of 32. So for example, if you're ever in a pharmacy, the packets of paracetamol that you can buy from behind the counter, i.e. the larger packets, will be pack sizes of 32. And then at the complete discretion of the pharmacist, the maximum supply that can be provided is 100 up to 100 tablets, which is essentially 3 boxes, which makes it 96. Okay, now the reasons that people may or might need to have larger quantities is because they might have one box at home, one box in the car, and one box in their, you know, office or at work or something, and they don't want to keep taking the same box everywhere. And sometimes you may think, actually, that's a reasonable request, so I can give more than one box, so I might give 2 or 3, etc. Okay, but that's at the discretion of the pharmacist. So let's start to think about POM medicines then. So prescription only medicines. It is listed in part 1 of Schedule 1 of the prescription only medicines order, and that's just something, again, just for your knowledge. You don't need to be able to recite that. So in terms of prescription only medicines, so they are available only on prescription. Okay, those medicines can only be obtained if a patient has a valid prescription. Those medicinal items are covered by an EU marketing authorization and are classified as POM or POM, and they can include items which are for parenteral administration, so i.e. those that are injectable, and that may contain controlled drugs, unless they have a previous marketing authorization which classifies them as a P or GSL, but they may or might be, or they tend to be, a POM. Anything that contains a cyanogenic substance, and anything that sort of generates or emits radiation will by default for these two become a POM. So I'm going to use paracetamol again. So maximum supply for the P was 32 tablets, and a maximum pack size, sorry, was 32 tablets. Maximum supply is 100. So when you have a product that, for example, has a pack size of 100, okay, it by virtue, because it's larger than 32, makes it a POM. So in most cases, when medicines go out of their sort of appropriate sort of legislation, i.e. they exceed the maximum pack size, they then get promoted or moved into the next category. So anything that was packaged and was larger than 32, so even if it was 36 tablets in a box, because for P medicines, it dictates it has to be 32 and 100, but if it's larger than the 32, i.e. this is 100, if it was 36, that would also be larger than 32, then that would make it a POM. So let's put some considerations towards maximum dose and maximum daily dose. So I'm going to use pseudoephedrine or Sudafed as an example. So pseudoephedrine or Sudafed has a maximum dose, i.e. the maximum the patient can take in any one go or any one moment, i.e. the max dose, as 60 milligrams. Okay, so the maximum dose of that formulation will be 60 milligrams. Now, in terms of the maximum daily dose, that's the maximum number of times or the maximum amounts your patient can have that throughout the day. So the maximum daily dose that the patient can have is 240 milligrams, okay? So what that means is the dosing helps you to identify either the maximum dose or the maximum daily dose. So the dosing on Sudafed, it says 60 milligrams every 4 to 6 hours, okay? 60 milligrams is the maximum dose, and you already have an understanding that the maximum daily dose is 240 milligrams. So essentially 240 divided by 60 gives you 4 times a day. So your patient can take it 4 times a day, okay? And they can space it out every 4 to 6 hours. So what that means is they can't have it 4 times a day, once every hour, okay? There has to be a gap of at least every 4 to 6 hours, but they can have up to 4 60-milligram tablets in a day. In terms of the MHRA, so they have a website and it has up-to-date information on any sort of recalls or safety alerts or any sort of new medicines which are going through their approvals processes. But it also has information about any sort of regulation or any safety concerns, and has access to sort of information leaflets and summaries of product characteristics. So if you need to find any information or signpost your patient, then this is an accessible Gov website which your patients may or might want to know about, but also you can signpost them too. In terms of identifying the classification, so the BNF gives you an indication of a medicinal products legal classification, and also you can use your electronic medicines compendium, so EMC, which we keep saying to you to use in your PAMS sessions. You can get the summary of product characteristics or the information leaflet, and at the top it very clearly kind of indicates to you the legal classification of a medicine. In the BNF, it tends to be denoted by a small annotation next to the sort of formulation pages. So when you get to the end of the monograph about a drug and you start to think about the different preparations, they will give you information about its legal classification. And I guess to summarize this lecture, obviously we have looked at the term medicinal product, we've had a look at the different legal classifications and whether there are any restrictions on their sale or supply, and we've also had a look at how you determine the legal classification of a product if you needed to look it up, and those being, you know, using the BNF and also using the EMC and identifying their legal classification via the summary of product characteristics.